UN Spider Knowledge Portal. So there we do knowledge management. You will see wealth of information of the space technology applications in all areas of disaster management. So this is, in short, our activities, and we have been in operation now more than 12 years now, and we have offered such support to more than 50 countries now. So this particular conference is a flagship conference of the UN Spider Office in Beijing, which is primarily looking after Asia, the Pacific. We also support activities in Africa, and in the conference always we also have participants from even Latin America and America, United States, Canada. So this is kind of a global conference which has happened for the last 9 years, and this is 10th such conference. And first time we have gone virtual because of the pandemic situation. And we have covered a range of topics through this conference. And since 2015, we focused on Sendai framework, how space technology can contribute in supporting implementation of Sendai framework. But in 2020, we thought it is most apt to consider the topic about the lessons learned during unprecedented pandemic situations. So because a lot of countries face disasters during this time, and it was a double challenge, coping up with the disasters as well as facing the pandemic situation. So in this context, how space technology made difference? What are the lessons learned that I think larger group would like to know? And also this will help us in preparing for the future, that how one should really prepare well this kind of information, and how these technologies can be well utilized in future if such pandemic comes. So I think this is quite off topic in 2020, and we will also draft a kind of paper which will be submitted to United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction for publishing outcomes of this particular conference. So looking forward to very good interaction, and with this we are all set to start the conference. We have for this particular conference 4 sessions. 2 sessions are today. The session 1 will be right now we are starting. It's about lessons learned during an unprecedented pandemic situation. For this session, we have 6 panelists from 2 from United Nations offices based in Bangkok and Geneva. We have panelists from India, National Disaster Management Authority. We also have 1 more United Nations panelist from Africa. And also 1 from Japan, Japanese Asian Disaster Reduction Center. So I will introduce one by one when I invite them. And we have another session at 3 o'clock Vienna time or Central Europe time, which will be 9 o'clock in Bangkok, little late there, and early morning United States. And because we have few speakers from United States in that session too, and that session is more on space technology contribution during pandemic situation, and it's more contribution to space for health. So these are 2 sessions today, and tomorrow we have another 2 sessions. We can talk about it later before closing this particular session. So with this, we will start session 1, and I would like to invite the first panelist of the session is Dr. Sanjay Srivastava, who is the Chief of Disaster Risk Reduction Section in UNESCAP, Bangkok. And he will be talking about disaster risk reduction and COVID-19 pandemic, changing policy perspective. So Sanjay, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sirish. I hope I'm audible. My audio is clear to all of you. It's fine. Thank you. Thank you, Sirish, and thank you very much for giving this opportunity to UNESCAP. And it's a real privilege to talk to all of you colleagues and share some of our ideas, some of our recent research. What is really challenging is the COVID pandemic, and in midst of the COVID, there are many disasters already striking whole part of the world, and particularly in Asia Pacific regions. So then what are the new policy perspective, the policy paradigms? So if I come to my slide second, the Yes. The today reality on the ground is there are cascading risk. There is no disaster at a time. There are multiple disasters. Those are happening at the same time. So on the one hand, there are climatic extremes, whether it is a cyclone, whether it is a heat waves, floods. On the other hand, COVID, and then also vector and waterborne diseases. So it's a complete intersection of disaster and health on the ground. So this is what is in DRR language we call is cascading risk. The COVID, for example, a health risk which cascaded to all other sectors, all part of the world, and became like a global pandemic. At the same time, when it intersects with other climate extremes, this creates a cascading risk of a very complex, of a terrible complexity. So my next slide is to show you what are the intersections. This is what is the cascading risk scenarios. So we have a scenario one. You see the left-hand side, and there are respective sustainable development goals. In the scenario one, there is already the risk drivers, which is poverty, inequality, environmental degradation, and population density, all risk drivers, urbanization. So it's a scenario of one kind. Then we have scenario B, which is the disaster, recurrent disasters, whether is extreme climate event, floods, drought, heat waves. So that's the scenario B. Scenario 3 is we have diseases, waterborne, vector-borne diseases. And scenario D is we have pandemic on the ground, like COVID. What is happening in reality today is all A, B, C, D scenarios are intersecting, are converging. And that convergence creates a cascading risk scenarios. The world was not prepared for, had no experience of this kind much in the past to manage a cascading scenarios of this kind. And that's the real challenge the whole world is confronting today. If I come to my next slide, the next slide is we used the climate science to capture this scenario on ground. This is a seasonal forecast from South Asia Climate Outlook Forum, because in the South Asia part, the disaster, particularly the floods, cyclones, and many of the climate-related disasters, including desert locusts, at some point of time, they were striking at the same time when the transmission of COVID-19 was also picking up. So we used what we call predictive risk analytics from June to September. What could be the weather, particularly the risk scenarios in terms of flood and drought, and where it is going to intersect with the transmission of COVID. And you could able to visualize 3 months from now, what could be a possible flood and drought, a probabilistic assessment of the flood and drought risk, vis-a-vis the transmission of COVID on the ground. So that helps the country, the decision makers, to visualize the cascading risk scenario in coming days. And that makes, to some extent, the key stakeholder to prepare better. So if I come to my next slide, the next slide clearly shows exactly right on dot. The dot is when Cyclone Amphan hit India and Bangladesh in May. And that was the time when the COVID in Bangladesh and India were also picking up in those regions. So there was a collision of Cyclone Amphan with COVID on the ground. Now you see the complexity of two disaster risk scenarios. While for evacuating from the cyclone, You need to take out people and put them in the cyclone shelters where there could not be social distancing norm possible. While to protect the people from the COVID, you need to be maintain social distancing and all hygiene related features. So there are two contrasting requirements. So two contrasting requirements at a time dealing with on the ground creates a real complexity of disaster risk. Here in this case, what happened, there were roughly 3 million people who were evacuated both in India as well as in Bangladesh side from the cyclone Amphan. At the same time, on the ground, there are COVID transmissions taking place. So what happened, many of these officials, what is called disaster response task, the force, who went for the evacuation, many also got infected from the COVID. So one risk intersects the other. And that's the most challenging part, manage two risks together. And that is where you really need a very intelligent risk analytics to create what we call a risk matrix, which identifies who are at risk from COVID and who are mostly at risk from the cyclone. And to the extent you identify those community risks exposed to the differential risk, in early warning language, we call impact-based and risk-informed early warning system. So if there are two risks intersecting each other on the ground, you have to create a risk matrix for the community exposed to COVID differently to the community exposed right on the track of the cyclone. This is very difficult in the practical sense to maintain, especially to segregate two risks, but the challenges lie put in place this kind of intelligent risk analytics, which can work for intersecting risk scenario. So managing this cascading risk is going to be quite challenging in days to come. If I start my next slide, the next slide shows how can you visualize? This is where a space technology plays such an important role. How can you visualize three risk scenarios at a time on the ground? Risk scenario one, which I shared with you, you have a vulnerable populations, particularly those community at risk. So you point out, you highlight, you identify those population at risk. Then scenario two is the cascading risk scenario. Flood affected vulnerable population confronting with COVID-19. This is a case in Myanmar. And then you come to the third scenario. You have flood, you have COVID, and you also have vector and waterborne diseases on the ground. This becomes systemic risk. So you visualize on the ground risk hotspot scenario one, cascading risk scenario two, and systemic risk scenario three. This is what is the real advantage of making a space technology applications. You can visualize risk scenarios on the ground, and you can plan your preparedness strategy or response strategy accordingly. So my next slide is to show what happened, because this is a space technology conference. So I thought I must share with you what has been the region's experience to deal with COVID and the climate extreme together. I just summarized the technology. There cannot be one technology. It is a wide range of the technology which were used by countries, starting from all where there were a COVID intersecting with multiple climate extremes. So you will be happy to note that despite the COVID, which has such a high transmission ratio, it has low mortality rates, and this containing to some extent to the COVID mortality, digital technology put a very big role in containing it and integrating it into the policy and healthcare. For example, for early detection and early warning, we use risk analytics, big data for risk governance, and telehealth for diagnostic, and use digital identity for delivery of the services. So all put together made a lot of impact. So if I come to my next slide, so my next slide shows what could be the future if the world has to prepare better for such crisis. What could be the future? There are some indication which came from the Sendai framework. Is the first framework, which includes biological hazards along with the natural and technological disaster. Can I come to the next slide, please? So the important point which I want to highlight here is in the Sendai framework, the key part is, of course, it has all hazards together, but more importantly, it has a system thinking approach. A human means the health of the human being, economic means the development, and ecological, ecosystem services. So it has taken into account the system thinking approach to address the systemic risk. The other point to note is the scale. Earlier, HEOGO was national to global. This is national to local, because disaster risk is, or systemic risk could be global, often global, but resilience is always local. And that is what the Sendai framework is quite complete. So if you look at Sendai perspective, if Sendai is to be implemented in total, in principle, it helps for building resilience to the systemic risk. My next slide is for addressing systemic risk. You need a scenario-based approaches. I demonstrated some of this. You need a host of intelligent risk analytics tool, from hazard exposure model to probabilistic deterministic ensembles and so on. And that's how you can address systemic risk. And this is where space technology plays a very important role. My next slide is to show you just few words that systemic risk is really a very challenging task to everybody, all part of the world. It cannot be addressed alone by one country. It has to be a global efforts. Sendai framework provides the framework, but the challenges is systemic risk is characterized by high complexity. It's a transboundary and global in nature, so one country not enough. Systemic risks are characterized by a stochastic relationship. You have all uncertainty between trigger and effects, so risk to uncertainty, that's the unique characteristic. Systemic risks are normally non-linear and includes tipping points. The systemic risk is normally not taken into account in the public policy domain, so that's the critical gap because of uncertainties and many other things. So you need, how to address the best way forward as of now is use a models of scenario building, and that's one approach where space will play a very important role in the future. My next slide is this is a scenario based approach. I start from the scope to, I have just listed out what could be the possible steps. The next slide, please. The next slide is what could be the real 8 steps which are important for scenario based risk analysis. I have highlighted this, and if you come to my next slide, the next slide shows in UNESCAP we have made some efforts to address systemic risk. And the next slide is this was just launched on 18th November, a compendium of 100 good practices from Asia Pacific regions, and there are quite a few on systemic risk. I will encourage my colleagues to go through this. This is a space application section of ISCAP which has brought this report out. The next slide is to tell you this is an important ISCAP initiative, Asia Pacific Disaster Resilience Network, where we have regional platforms to all the knowledge, particularly in systemic risk, you need a very deep drive. So technology innovations, data, disaster and health nexus, that is where the cascading impacts become so critical. The next slide. The next slide is, I would personally request to my colleagues to go through these 3 documents. These are all available on the website. There we have done a deep drive on understanding the systemic risk and building a scenario-based risk analytics to address the cascade of climate and health-related hazards together. So it will help you from the, especially for those who are having technical background, space technology, what are we call risk metrics, impact-based and risk-informed early warning system, how this can be realized. We have experimented this in multiple locations of Asia and Pacific regions. Hope you will find this useful. This is an intersection of COVID with climatic extremes. What could be the possible risk scenario analysis? I think that could be my last slide. And thank you. And thank you very much to all of you again for giving this opportunity. I will be available if there are any queries, any questions, and thank you once again for this opportunity.
Thank you, Sanjay. That is a very comprehensive and context setting for this particular session. I know that you have published a number of policy papers on this particular COVID-19 background, and this particular presentation was a gist of all the work that you have done, which is guiding member states in Asia Pacific very well during this crisis within crisis. So thank you so much. If there are questions, we'll come back to you again. So for now, we go to our next presenter. It comes from Japan, Mr. Koji Suzuki, who is the Executive Director of Asian Disaster Reduction Center, and he will be talking about his experience in Japan and particularly Sentinel Asia. Over to you, Koji.
Yes, Sanjay-san, do you hear me clearly?
Yes, we can hear you well.
I'm sorry to attend the meeting lately. Today, I'll be sharing some of the initiatives of Central Asia which are related to and or based on the lessons during this unprecedented COVID-19. My presentation includes some proposals to UNSPIDER community for collaboration. Next, please. Next, please. Yes, thank you. On 17th July, Central Asia Executive Secretary announced the opportunity of remote sensing technology under COVID-19. If I summarize it, those are information products by satellite observation enables them to narrow down a possible affected area remotely without visiting area. Damage maps contribute to effective relief operations under the restriction on mobility and distancing due to the COVID-19. And damage maps generated from satellite data in combination with OpenStreetMaps could contribute to detecting the affected area more precisely, and local authorities could identify appropriate evacuation sites and develop evacuation plans with satellite-based information products. And next, please. Central Asia has been, is now, and will be committed to making this space-based data platform for DRR more effective, reliable, practical, and flexible. For this strategy, Central Asia is now promoting and suggesting these initiatives as shown on the slide. Some of them are suggestions on collaboration to our potential partners in UNSPIDER community. Next, please. The first one, Optimus. Optimus is a system developed by GISTA Thailand. Next, please. Optimus is the integrated management system of entire emergency observation operations in Central Asia. You can make emergency observation requests, watch observation operations and analyzing procedures, and sharing and downloading the information product in Optimus system. It makes the entire emergency observation procedure more effective, more practical from the beginning to the end. And I can skip this. Next, please. Next one. Next, please. I can skip this page. Yes. To make satellite-based information products more reliable and accurate, the validation with ground truth is very much critical. Mobile application for post-disaster survey is one of the solutions, which is led by GIC AIT. Next, please. This mobile application is developed to collect information on the latest disasters and their impacts. The collected information is useful for satellite-based disaster mapping and validation of information products with ground truth. This initiative contributes greatly to more precise, more accurate, satellite-based information product, which is very practical for DRR operations. Next, please. And I can skip this page. Next, please. And this is the face of the mobile application, just for your information. And next, please. You can access the application through the links and the QR code as shown on the slide. And next, please. Calibration. The new initiative led by Yamaguchi University is development of calibration tool for AI analysis of satellite imagery of multiple satellites. With this calibration tool, you can apply data of multiple satellites very easily. Next, please. Thank you. There are a lot of satellites available for remote sensing. If we can develop a calibration site or a calibration tool for those different satellites, we can easily apply the data from to AI analysis for information products. Next, please. This is the picture of corner reflectors as coherent targets of SAR imageries for calibration. The reflectors are located in the campus of Yamaguchi University in Japan. Next, please. And this is a picture of ground target for optical images, located in Yamaguchi University in Japan also. And next, please. Mirror analysis is to collect 2 hours of calibration targets for deriving absolute calibration coefficients of Earth remote sensing systems in the solar reflective spectrum. Arrays of single mirrors used to oversample the sensor's point spread functions, PSS, providing necessary spatial quality information needed to perform the radiometric calibration of a sensor. Once it is developed, will be open to the public, this tool. We are expecting the organizations of UN Spider community to be the partners of this initiative by taking optical data and or SAR data and sharing that data with us. Next, please. And Central Asia is making the emergency observation operation more flexible for more practical platform for the end users. Basically, in Central Asia, National Disaster Management Organization of ADRC and Central Asia members, which are called Joint Project Team members, can activate emergency observation operations as end users. The organization which activates emergency observation applies the information product for its operation, DRR operations in their own country. Next, please. In August, there was an explosion in Beirut, Lebanon. AFAD, Turkey, requested to activate Central Asia for the operation in the country other than Turkey. Next, please. In October, an earthquake hit Izmir, Turkey. Upon the information of earthquake event, Sentinel Asia prepared the emergency observation waiting for the request of Afad Turkey. Turkey found difficulties to activate Central Asia in their emergency rescue operations. Seeing this situation, ADRC activated Central Asia on behalf of Afad Turkey. This operation is supported by JICA, which is very much interested in information product of satellite imagery for their international emergency support planning. Next, please. And the last one is another suggestion or proposal to UNESCAP for the collaboration with Central Asia. Since Central Asia Emergency Observation project manager in Central Asia Emergency Observation, project manager and data analysis organization are assigned in advance. UNESCAP could escalate to International Disaster Charter through Central Asia for the disaster event in Asia and Pacific to minimize the lead time for the process. This could make more effective and time-saving for activating from activation to delivery. That is the end of my presentation. Thank you for your hearing. Dr. Shirish, I'm supposed to go back to the meeting with the government. Allow me to get out of this meeting. Sorry.
Thank you, Coach. This is a great intervention from you. I know that you have another commitment, so probably if any question comes, maybe we can email you later. And
I'm going to join the session tomorrow, maybe.
Right. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for time.
Thank you. Okay. Bye-bye. Bye. So that was the presentation about Sentinel Asia. It's a great mechanism for emergency response that is primarily active in Asia region, and you could see that a lot of new tools are being adopted by Sentinel Asia mechanism. That shows how technologies are integrated together. So with that, we can move to our next presentation by Mr. Krishna Vatsa. He is a member of National Disaster Management Authority of India, which is an apex body in India that directly reports to the Prime Minister of India. And I have privilege of associating with Mr. Krishna Vatsa when he was Indian Administrative Service Officer in the state of Maharashtra, and we worked together for a disaster that killed more than 50,000 people in Latur city of Maharashtra, state of India, and we developed disaster management information system. So right from that, it's a great journey up to the member of National Disaster Management Authority. And Mr. Krishna, we are keen to listen your experiences of COVID-19 plus disaster management in India. Over to you, please. I think you are mute. Unmute, please. Okay, now okay.
Can you hear me now? Yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you. Thanks very much for your kind invitation and allowing me to share some of our experiences where we are dealing with both the COVID and natural disasters simultaneously. And as I speak to you, Cyclone Nivar is approaching Tamil Nadu. It's also a severe cyclone, and we are preparing for that. In May, we had Cyclone Amphan, which affected Odisha and West Bengal. And then we had Cyclone Nisarga, which affected the state of Maharashtra. In between, we had also several floods. And we also, you mentioned about desert locusts. So one disaster after another in the midst of the rising number of COVID-19. So it's quite a challenge dealing with different kinds of disasters, affecting the country together. But if it comes to the brass tacks, we have to organize a response, and we have to deal with it. And saving lives is the most important priority. And what we recognize that it's very important to have safe evacuation. When the people, when the cyclone makes the landfall, people need to be evacuated in large numbers. So how should we evacuate people safely in the midst of lockdown? The cyclone Amphan happened when the country was in the midst of national lockdown. So most of the transport and the activities were closed. So it was quite a challenge, but we organized that. And what is important that while evacuating, we maintain the social distance. And we impressed upon both the responders as well as the people who were to be evacuated that keeping the safe distance is actually key to safe evacuation, and this is how we can prevent the spread of infection. So we dealt with this entire thing at two levels. One, that we improved increase the level of IEC, information, education, and communication. We started talking to the people, and we talked to them about all the precautions that they need while they are evacuating. While evacuating, we also need to work at the level of cyclone shelters or flood camps. We have a definite capacity for the cyclone shelters or the flood camps. But if we have to prevent overcrowding, we have to maintain the social distance, then we have to have lesser number of people in these shelters or the camps. So if a cyclone has the capacity for 1,000 people, accommodating 1,000 people, then we need to bring it down to 400 people, which means that we need to set up more cyclone shelters. We need to set up more flood camps, and it requires that we repurpose the existing buildings for setting up more such shelters. So we requisitioned a large number of school and college buildings, and they were used for cyclone shelters and flood camps. So when we increase the number of cyclone shelters, then we prevent the overcrowding. So we revised the guidelines for evacuation, and we got more and more buildings repurposed for the purpose of for accommodating people. And then all these buildings that we requisitioned, they had to be sanitized. So that was also a huge operation, sanitizing all the buildings ahead of the evacuation. And then when the people were brought in, they were handed free masks and sanitizers. So talking to the people, increasing the capacity of the shelters and flood camps, and free distribution of masks and sanitizers, and maintaining social distance. These were the key steps to preventing the spread of infection. Now, what is very important is that we organize our own preparedness and our own response to deal with the threat posed by the COVID, which means that both the disaster management department and health departments, they need to work together. They need to ensure that we have enough supplies of masks and soaps and hand sanitizers, and that we are able to talk to the people frequently, looking at their issues and getting them checked. Now, it's also very important that all the state responders, we have the NDRF, National Disaster Response Force, and we have a state disaster response force. So all the personnel who are participate from these response forces who are participating in evacuation, they wear masks. So masks, of course, was universal, but still the responders got infected. Within the NDRF, about 100 people got infected, 100 responders got infected. And this is quite a big number, and we have to take care of those responders. Fortunately, all of them recovered, and we didn't have any deaths. But we have to take extra precautions to ensure the health of the responders. We also have to provide the insurance coverage for all the responders. So that is an added step that we take to see that responders work with much greater state of assurance. The health facilities that we have set up, that also need to be augmented considerably. We need to ensure that the existing health facilities and hospitals are not overburdened. And most of the people who are in the camps, they must be given health assistance on site. Which means that if we need to conduct the COVID-19 tests, they should be conducted within the camps, and it works quite well. We use the rapid antigen test extensively to screen the people. Of course, the RAT tests are not foolproof, so in certain situations, we also organize the RT-PCR tests. So the testing on the site, that really screens the people who are showing the symptoms. They need to be shifted, they need to be segregated, and some of the situations they need to be shifted to the hospitals. We also organized the mobile health clinics, particularly in the cities. They went around different localities which were affected by the floods, and these mobile health clinics were extremely helpful. So basically on-site health facilities, extensive use of COVID-19 testing facilities, and the arrangements for anyone who is showing symptoms to be shifted to the hospitals, and increasing the bed capacities in the hospitals, in anticipation of the floods and cyclones. These are some of the important health measures that were taken ahead of the disasters. Now, how the COVID-19 spreads actually depends upon two important variables. It's one, when it is happening, when the disaster is striking the country. When a disaster happens, when the COVID-19 incidence is increasing, we have not yet reached the peak, then I think there is a much greater possibility of the cascading impact, and we can see more and more infections due to the natural disasters, because it's always difficult to maintain social distance. But when we are past the peak, then I think we can see that the infection could be controlled, and we would not see so much of a rise in infection due to the natural disaster. So it very much depends upon when we are reaching the peak. The second important variable that is critical is if it is happening in the urban areas or rural areas. So Cyclone Amphan struck, say, rural areas, Sundarbans area of West Bengal, or rural areas of Odisha. And there the overall incidence of COVID-19 was relatively low. So the infection was not very, very high. Despite the other impacts that these communities faced, the overall incidence of the COVID-19 did not rise significantly. On the other hand, if we have these floods or cyclones affecting the cities where the density of population is high, you would see a much higher spread of infection. So we could see more tests and more infections in Hyderabad when it was recently affected by floods. So whether the disaster is urban or rural makes a big difference to the spread of the virus, and also the burden on the health system. Two very important steps that all the state governments and central governments need to take. One, of course, is the supply of masks and sanitizers. The second is the food. That people must get food. So that really ensures the immunity. And without food, if there are some food insecure people, the immunity goes down. So the provision of free food is a very, very important form of assistance to the people, and it protects them against the virus. Financial assistance to the people is also very helpful, and the quickest way of providing some ex gratia assistance, some quick debit transfer is always a direct transfer is also very, very helpful. So in order to ensure that we have sufficient financial resources available for dealing with the disasters, the Government of India took steps that to earmark 50% of all the relief funds for natural disasters. So while we were repurposing the NDRF, National Disaster Response Fund, and the State Disaster Response Fund to meet the needs of COVID-19, we still earmark 50% of the money for dealing with the natural disasters. So provision of financial assistance, food supplies, health supplies, all these things together, along with communication with the people and along with the necessary precautions that we need to take at the level of flood camps and cyclone shelters. These are some of the important measures that we need to protect our population and prevent the spread of infection. I think I would say that we have done a decent job of dealing with both the COVID-19 as well as the natural hazards, and we have been able to prevent the deaths. I would say that some of the states which have a higher level of preparedness for cyclones and floods, they are better at dealing with the cascading impacts. Odisha did quite well, and I'm sure Tamil Nadu would also do much better. Those states which are not so good at preparedness, they may face difficulty in dealing with both the crises. So the lesson is this, that we need to be better prepared, and once we are better prepared, we can also contain the impact of the cascading disasters. So these are some of the observations from our experience of dealing with the dual impact of COVID-19 and the floods and cyclones that we experienced this year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Krishnawatsa. That was very insightful, especially for the space community, which plays with a lot of satellite images and space technologies. But knowing this ground situation, the challenges that are faced by the responders among this COVID-19 situation, I think that gave a great insight. My question is, are you going to stay through, because we will have certain questions towards the end? After
I will stay. I will stay.
That would be great. That would be great. Then we'll come back to you. Yeah. So then please allow me to go to our next panelist. So we have so far listened from Japan, India, and also UNESCAP's policy perspective. The next one, the speaker comes from Africa region. His name is Titus Kuer. He is a senior resilient advisor in United Nations Development Program in Ethiopia. I know that he has extensively worked in various countries, not only in Africa, but also in Asia. And I requested him if he can speak about lessons learned during this pandemic situations with focus on Africa region. So, Tatos, thank you for joining. Over to you, please.
Can you hear me, Sharik?
Very well. Please go ahead. We can hear you. Titus. I know that Titus was facing difficulty in joining, probably because of unstable internet. So Titus, are you able to? Now you're back.
The internet seemed to be a bit. Can you hear me?
We can hear you well. I will switch off my video also for better quality here.
Please try and switch off your video because I think I have connection problems. And then draw my attention once you are not able to hear me. Thanks to colleagues across the globe. And thank you, Sharif, for this opportunity. I think the title, as you read, is probably changed a little bit based on what we discussed earlier on, which is now the use of space-based technology to strengthen humanitarian development and peace nexus in the face of COVID-19 and multiple pre-existing crises. This is simply because, I wanted to have this title because this is an opportunity for us to be able to understand what are some of the basic things that we need to do to be able to progress towards achievement of the SDGs. So my reflection is going to be on these 5 key areas. That is, it's going to be what is the concept of the so-called humanitarian development and peace nexus. And this would lead us into what are some of the reflection in terms of the use of space-based technology and the implication of this so-called nexus approach with some opportunities and conclusions for panelists to take home. But please bear with me. I've tried as much as possible to put a lot of text in the system because I believe that these things will be very important once you leave here so that you can always be able to read through and understand what some of the bases are all about. But I think there will be some delays as I go alongside with the presentation due to the internet being dragged all the time. But I just hope that given the fact that at least I've been able to connect struggling throughout, I just hope that we'll be able to progress a little bit. Next slide, please. So the first school of thought in relation to what we refer to as the humanitarian development and peace nexus actually came from a recent Sahel debate in relation to the issues that govern around crisis in the Sahel region, where the nexus was viewed as a way of system thinking instead of looking at individual components or short-term quantitative outcomes. The system thinking look at feedbacks and connections and promote concerted actions and cooperation on global scale across all sectors and across time and space. Please move to the next slide, please. This was one of the arguments that came out in relation to the nexus that we are looking at. Now, the second school of thought looked at the nexus in different ways, where they considered nexus or the issue of nexus programming as understood as an approach or a framework that considered both immediate and long-term needs of affected people and enhanced opportunities for peace. This was another school of thought that came from Oxfam in relation to what they think that the issue of nexus should represent. The final segment of school of thought, based on what I've analyzed so far, is a shift from the aid system, which in recognition of the fact that the system is not responding to needs, improving collaborative between humanitarian and development actors and putting them, the most people at the center of the system, was a key during the 2016 humanitarian World Humanitarian Summit that was held in Istanbul, where I actually had the opportunity to participate in the summit. And there, most of the people that gathered came out with the fact that to be able to reach the furthest behind as ascribed in the Sustainable Development Goals, then we need to make sure that at least no one is left behind. And this approach is what we now refer to as the humanitarian development nexus, and before the peace analysis was added. So in short, the whole argument started with what do we need to do differently in relation to all the things that we are looking at. Now, why the nexus? Because we keep on, the COVID-19 has given us a lot of lessons in relation to how we respond, in relation to how we carry on with our development programs and link with other links that are expected to contribute towards the sustainable development goals that we are looking for. However, we seem to forget most of the lessons that we are learning. Now, the Nexus indeed actually looked at, and it's built on the expansion of the disaster risk reduction initiative that we've been working on, the resilience and the fragility that we've been looking at all the time. So it has synergies with early warning and early action in interventions, and built on programs that link humanitarian intervention with recovery and long sustainable development agendas. It has also a complementarity with resilient thinking, where we are looking forward to making sure that at least in all our programs, we're not just looking at areas that are prone to hazard, but we are looking at trying to avoid creating more hazard, the do no harm syndrome. It also builds on work that is embedding in conflict approaches and analysis, and then seek towards addressing the fragility of the system. Now, the issue of the Nexus in terms of the new NWOW, that is a new way of working. Ultimately, its approach and then the associated wording, new way of working, should transform financial mechanism planning processes and technical thinking, implementing models and campaigning practices. And making this to happen will require the technical and business community to be able to come together to achieve the desired goals. So the Nexus actually focuses on putting people at the center of all the activities that we are doing. So prioritization and knowledge and capacities where possible, and approaches working with local and national authorities. These are all aligned with the Nexus agenda. And obviously, this is where UNSPIDA is very important in terms of contributing its quota towards ensuring that the national and local authorities are equipped to be able to support this business. Next slide, please. So what I try to do in my next slide, C and D, is to make sure that at least we understand where we are coming from. UNSPIDA has been in existence, and this is a decade of the workshop that is being held this year. And irrespective of the challenges that we are facing, efforts are still in place to make sure that at least this platform is created for us to share information and to learn from each other in terms of what we are working in our various countries, in our comfort zone, to make sure that we can still respond to the needs of the affected people. So the mandate of UNSPIDA, just like any other UN organization, the United Nations Platform for Space Information for Disaster Risk Reduction and Emergency, UNSPIDA, and its as a new organization, its mission is to actually ensure that all countries and international and regional organizations have access to and develop the capacity to use all space-based information to support the full disaster management cycle. So what it means is that irrespective of which of the cycle we are looking at, whether we are looking at the preparedness or we are looking at the response to the rehabilitation to the continuum, UNSPIDA is very important in terms of making sure that at least the information or data accessibility is available in terms of supporting decision making. Next slide, please. I think I'm being deprived of some of the things. So UNSPIDA is actually aimed in terms of making sure that all types of space information and services relevant to disaster risk management and being the gateway to space-based information for disasters. It also bridges and connects the disaster risk management community and space communities. And of course, it is a facilitator in terms of capacity building and institutional strengthening. And these are the kind of things that UNSPIDA has been in the past, been a champion to, visiting many other countries within globally. And of course, making sure that at least policies that are supposed to be designed are all made available or are all supported in terms of rephrasing them to face the current challenges or to face any other challenges that are perceived within those particular countries. So I will escape the next slide, which deals with the policies and all those things UNSPIDA has been doing or pursuing in the past to support countries. But we'll move straight to what is new within this Nexus agenda. You hear about the Nexus every time here, and then as if it's one of the buzzwords that has just come out, like resilient or sustainable development. Yet at the center of all these things, it requires all of us to come collaboratively and work towards achieving the desired goal. That is the progress towards this, sustainable development goals. So indeed, we are dealing with a complex system where development, peace, and humanitarian actions are very important in terms of making sure that our development programs are not just risk informed, but then are sustainable. So like other approaches, the Nexus has a lot to offer in terms of building resilience and contributing to the SDGs. In this direction, I'll probably want to look at a number of factors here, which are not just limited, but are a lot of them that need to be perceived depending on the context within which country you belong to, and what are the socio-political economic situation in those particular countries. So it seeks to ensure that there is a changing system that fits people's realities. We continue to look at issues, look at the reality of people. What is it that is required individually, at a community level, can make an informed decision in terms of resilience. So, and I would probably just want to give a couple of examples. In the past 10 years, the number of conflicts and conflict-related deaths around the world have risen sharply. Conflict has become more protracted and displacement more common, and conflict is currently driving about 80% of the humanitarian needs. And of course, I mean, one of the things that we are looking for here is to make sure that at least we work some of us out of jobs, not just meeting the needs of the people that are affected, but making sure that we can reduce their needs. And once we are able to reduce their needs, then it means that the disasters that will happen will probably be events, and we'll be able to respond effectively at time and scale. So at the same time, climate-related shocks are becoming more intense and more frequent. For example, drought in the Sahel, where we recently just held a high-level discussion on the subject matter in terms of resilience, is now more regular than in the past. Economic losses due to natural catastrophes in 2017 were 93% as compared to the cumulative figure between 2000 and 2016. What a drastic change. So underlining that both the immediate and severity of crisis and the risk to development are escalating, the increased risk of extreme weather event is being driven by climate change trends, following consecutive years of above average global land and the sea surface. And while in the face of all these things, the extreme weather and conflict-related shocks and stresses, people also experience human-induced injustice and restriction in terms of their right, freedom, and development opportunities. And these are things that are very important. And that's the reason why we're looking at it from a different perspective as to how we respond to emergencies. Obviously, 100% sure that in many of the countries, the responders are those that are from the humanitarian field, but then we have tend to neglect the development and then the peace actors, especially in countries within the African continent where peace is very important in terms of building resilient communities. Now, further, climate-related risks often overlap or exacerbate each other, resulting in complex needs. For example, in areas of the Sahel, climate-related shocks have pushed pastoralists who often have little power within state structures to migrate earlier, and then the longer-term periods. This combined with a lack of conflict resolution mechanism and fueling local conflicts over natural resources that increasingly result in violence. And these are some of the things that are driving the protracted crisis in relation to conflict. The trends have either re-exposed or they've exposed the link between people, immediate needs, and pre-existing inequalities. A particular stark example is the search for gender justice, where gender inequality tends to be replicated and reinforced by crisis, and the humanitarian and peace initiatives currently implemented in response to crisis too often do not significantly prioritize an analysis of gender relations or women participation with risk doing more than harm. And this has an implication in relation to what we do. So there has been progress, of course, in DRR and resilience and conflict sensitivity, but then the irony of all these things is that all the 8 actors are failing to tackle the long-term transformational changes that needed to address increasingly compounding and independent vulnerability. So it is very important that at least we're looking at all these things encompassing, making sure that at least the links is like a chain, and each part of the chain needs to be as strong as the other. Otherwise, that is where we are going to have the problems. Otherwise, as some school of thought even keyword, that disasters is as a result of the failure of development programs. So we are even looking at changing the trend. Instead of humanitarian development and peace nexus, we should rather be development, humanitarian development, and peace nexus, so that to inform ourselves that the failure of our development programs our act of criminality today will be seen tomorrow and will be judged by the system. So moving on to the next slide. So the importance of peace now became very essential during the World Humanitarian Summit in 2016, where there has been an increased emphasis on peace as the third component of the nexus. And this is what the United Nations Secretary General has put in place as a sustainable peace at the top of its agenda in rolling out its vision for UN capability and preventing conflict, integrating development, human rights, and peace and security as a whole. So the new way of working, if we move to the next slide, because these we can always read them somewhere along the line. The new way of working to support the implementation of the Nexus approach seeks to, and it's very important that at least once the World Humanitarian Summit all agreed, the new way of working was designed to actually operationalize the Nexus and to facilitate a whole range of bringing humanitarian development and peace actors to work closely together towards collective outcomes. And these collective outcomes are what we are now seeking towards. So just as one of the examples, my arrival in Ethiopia, having worked in many countries across the globe, including Japan, Philippines, Maldives, Kenya, Mozambique, and of course, Myanmar, my favorite country, and finally settling in Ethiopia. The new way of working has become challenging in relation to what we do because people are not prepared to leave out what they want to or where they were to come out from their comfort zone. So the goal of the humanitarian development and peace actors to be able to work together, this means recognizing the value of immediate life saving while wherever possible avoiding fragmentation of project and output base. It is also important to put more emphasis on promoting local leadership, governance, institutional building interventions, which may be layered or phase out humanitarian development and peace interventions as we join up in terms of making sure that we contribute to sustainable development goals. So what does the approach actually look like? If we talk about the Nexus approach, how does it and what does it look like? So the new normal, in inverted commas, in which crises tend to be protracted means that recognizing and responding to the links between immediate and long-term needs is increasingly important because often than not, like even in the COVID as we talk, most of the things they're looking at immediate needs, for instance, PPEs and all those things. Of course, these are very important, but we should look into the long-term development agenda that can bring the two of them so that there's no cut-off somewhere along the line, but continuously to link up with the development phase and thereby making sure that at least if we are going to have such a pandemic somewhere along the line, our response mechanism would have been improved and then we'll be able to address the needs of the people promptly. Next slide, please. So what are the implications for programming? Because if we are talking about Nexus, where we are bringing people to work together, what are the implications of programming and deliverables? So if the Nexus is to succeed, there will be some implication in the way we deliver programs. Here, I will probably want us to look at it from a holistic and integrated contextual analysis. So to properly understand the needs and the root causes of vulnerability, fragility, and inequality, a comprehensive and unified multi-sectoral assessment methodology is needed at an organizational level. Yep. So beyond the immediate program location, this is what we talked about in terms of making sure that at least we are not just responding to the immediate need, but we are looking into the long-term analysis. So beyond the immediate program location, analysis should consider the broader political implications of intervention. For example, the impact of prioritizing needs, just like in this case of the COVID-19, in access to government-held and urban areas upon impartial, the principle of humanity, as well as the long-term social cohesion. Now, in the areas where the recurrent conflict and climate related, there is the need to be to have mechanism to share, to track, and enhance knowledge across intervention that support the same population groups. And this means moving away from siloed specialist tools at organizational level in favor of joint data collection and analysis of contextuals to inform our development agenda. Information sharing is also very paramount, and joint assessment tools and data collection are also very important. And of course, multi-mandated organizational, bringing together different teams at a response level is key. So all these areas that I'm looking at or reflecting on are areas that require the services of all of us. It is not just only UN SPIDER, it is not just only UNDP, but then it is all the UN agencies, development partners, the government alike that need to come together to be able to make that change. So the next slide that talks about the long-term country strategies versus the plan, which seeks to systematically inform us that transformational changes takes longer than the one program cycle. Next slide, please. These take longer than the one program cycle. This is especially true in fragile contexts where sustainable development is non-linear. We don't expect it to be linear as we normally want to see it. So we need to shift first from short-term project of 6 to 12 months duration to 2 to 3 to 5 years program cycle, and ultimately 10 to 15 years goals that deliver across humanitarian development peace spectrum. And linked to this is a shift from output-oriented thinking to outcome-based planning. Most of our programs have always been output-oriented instead of the outcome-based planning. And the latter, that is the output-based planning, can bring greater opportunity to build partnership and local capacity as goals in themselves beyond project-related output. And this is one of the areas that we are thinking that if the subject is to be taken forward, all of us need to embrace it, and we need to come up with an output planning, output-based planning instead of the outcome-based planning, instead of the output-based planning that we've been looking at all the time. So in relation to that, I think you've done one of the slides. Go back, please. It also requires that there is the need for investment in adaptive capacity to be efficient and effective. Programs need to be agile, responsive to changes in context, flexible in activities, budget lines, among others. So, and this requires consistent and transparent engagement with donors and national stakeholders. And a field that UN SPIDER has been championing all the time in engaging national stakeholders in relation to some of the things that are very important within the disaster risk management cycle. So the slide that shows is a collaborating and knowledge and capacity sharing, which is very important. So here I'll probably want to reflect on the fact that staff would not be expected to, they are not expected to be expert in all the 3 areas that we just mentioned, humanitarian development and peace, especially in the context that already challenging to recruit people in all these areas. However, a nexus approach does require implementers to step out of their comfort zone. And this is very important, and work across different disciplines. Multi-mandated organizations, including UN SPIDER, need to support capacity sharing, cross-learning and upskilling to ensure that staff and partners are able to deliver. The principles, the language, the interests, and technical team need to be brought together by collaborative co-production while subsuming the distinct standalone benefit of each technical area. And this also means adapting operational practices. The need to deliver development outcomes in humanitarian context means that business support function to be even more closely, work more closely with programs so that critical patterns in the season constraints are not missed. So this means that the success of the programming, if we go to the next slide, you've gone back to further back. If we go to slide H5, where we are now talking about the success of the programming. Maybe it's my internet. The how is more important as the what. So working across disciplines and finding common ground in order to meet the need of the most vulnerable people will require expanding technology, knowledge, and increased emphasis on soft skills. It is much about how we do our work as what we do. Behavior needs to be changed, and such behavior that needs to be changed will include consensus building, navigating and communicating complex issues, and system thinking, as noted earlier. And we will also need to better our coordination mechanism. I think you're probably not moving as I move with my slide. Please, can you move the slide? I'm now on I. So what are some of the opportunities in relating to all these things? Of course, I mean, I'm just going to go through all the opportunities because I've highlighted a lot of them within the PowerPoints, which I believe that these will be shared somewhere along the line. So in relation to the opportunity, the next approach and related changes in the 8th architect bring many opportunities to more holistic and effective way in addressing people's vulnerability before, during, and after crisis. So here I would like to look at the opportunities in 3 folds: programming, funding, and policies. So it serves in delivering better results. And that is very important. That's what we're always looking forward to. So there's more scope for supporting the people who respond first to the crisis. Community-led disaster risk reduction action plans, for example, can contribute to transformational long-term change. A holistic approach can also facilitate more consistent and participatory action across all change. And these are very fundamental in relation to what we are looking for. So engaging with the local and national structures, because the humanitarian development and peace nexus also call for engagement with local and national structures. So, and this long-term framework and common goals for the sustainable development and national priority plans, often than not, they have a very clear statement that says that the national engagement with national and local actors is very important towards progress in achieving the SDGs. And of course, where the local and national people are engaged, it means there's a greater opportunity for ensuring that they are better prepared and be able to help the communities. At the same time, working with national and local leaders can reduce the duplication and increase coherence among a diverse range of actors. In relation to justice, there is also a great potential for improving gender justice. If we want to move to the next one, 1.3, although other risks that progress will undermine where gender and identity issues normally rank very low. In many humanitarian situations, pre-existing gender inequalities are exacerbated and can put women and girls at disproportionate risk. So the humanitarian development peace nexus is able to answer some of these in terms of making sure that these are all addressed from the rest phase or from the development humanitarian phase and peace. So it also brings about increase in early warning and early action. And this is very important and an area that UN SPIDER has been very working in. Looking at, for instance, in terms of the flood, drought monitoring, and all those indices that have been developed and people trained, capacity build to be able to support and provide information to national leaders to make decisions. So the early warning, early action is fundamental in saving lives and property. The Nexus approach provides an opportunity to explore how early warning and early action relating to natural hazard and conflict prevention can be more fully implemented, both in terms of more effectively protecting and supporting community in terms of reducing response costs. And an example I would like to cite here is the fact that the USAID estimate that an early humanitarian response saved 2.5 billion over 15 years of an average of 163 million per year. You will see the reference of this somewhere along the line as we move on. Now, moving on, the funding part also becomes very important, which I will not spend a lot of time because there are many of those donors that are very keen in terms of the humanitarian development and peace nexus. And we all think that if this is well taken, donors will be prepared to put some funds in place and to help countries instead of just the quick fix one during any emergency like this one. And of course, in the face of other multiple crises such as the desert locust as well as flooding, then we will be able to have this kind of continuum from the response to the development and peace, bringing in the peace as an element in countries that are having protracted crises as a result of many political dimensions. So in relation to policies, we also feel that this will be very important in terms of the policy objective, where it brings all stakeholders together to have a more holistic approach that include addressing the policy issue that severely impact people's lives. And this is very important because bringing all these people together will have a common vision in terms of what they do. And of course, the local actors will also play a major role, and engagement in terms of any belligerence, that is disagreement before any conflict and issue can be resolved. So I will probably want to move on to my last but one slide. where I will present some food for thought in relation to some of the things that have been observed over the years. Being working with the UN for the past 15, 16 years now, some of the things that have been observed. To highlight the fact that the first, please go to the slide with L, useful reflections. So there's the first statement that I've just quoted, which came from a colleague friend of mine in Japan, Mikio, a contribution that we made to a professor of ours when he was going to make a keynote address in the recent Asia disaster conference. And here, Mikio noted that while various technologies have been developed, many people do not escape from disasters, which is unfortunate. I mean, we have all the technology, including the technology from space-based technology, yet our early warning systems are still failing us in relation to what we are able to bring together to respond to the need of the people. So, and this is despite the risk maps, warning, information, we precisely do not still have the ability to be able to reduce the life losses. Now, the second thing that I want to take up here is Albert Einstein, who in his reflection noted that it has become appallingly obvious that technology
Hello. Titus, it looks like you are dropped out again with your internet problem. So participants, let's give you like less than a minute, see if you can come back. Otherwise, we'll move to the next presenter and then we can get him back. He was almost on his last slide anyway. Let me just message him and then we probably will move to the next one. Just a minute. Okay, so I have given message to Titus. Probably he will come back. So meanwhile, what we can move to the next presenter, and then if he comes back, we'll let Titus conclude his presentation. So I hope Adam, are you ready for the presentation?
I'm here, yes.
Yeah. So next presentation is by Mr. Adam Paish. He is from United Nations Office for Disaster Risks Reduction in Geneva. And as I told you that this office is also co-organizer of this conference, and he would be sharing his presentation on opportunities to connect space-based information to understanding systematic risks, COVID-19 and beyond. So Adam, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the warm welcome. I'm very reassured actually to hear, especially from Dr. Srivatsawa's presentation, sort of acknowledging the role of the Sendai framework in orienting a lot of the kind of work that we need to be doing, especially maybe zooming out in that more systemic perspective. And then in Dr. Kuyor's presentation just now, he made an interesting comment, a number of interesting comments about gender justice, I think. And I'm a little bit dismayed to be on a manel again for the first time in quite a long time. So hopefully we can, in the next version of this, do a bit more balance. I will try to sort of put this into what I think is the context of opportunities for space-based information in understanding and managing systemic risk. Titus's, one of his last comments before he dropped off actually was exactly the inspiration for this. His friend Mikio said, we have the technology and we have a load of technology, but we keep suffering. We keep having the same, not even necessarily the same disasters, but we have warnings and we have technology, but we're not quite there yet. So thank you. I'll try to keep track with the slides. I only have 4 or 5 slides, so I will speak more than I present from the slides. but it really is about systemic risks. Risks being systemic and the solutions needing to be embedded into our systems. So I'll start maybe with two completely useless questions that I will not answer. One of them is, what should we have been monitoring to better catch and manage COVID-19 before it became a global catastrophe? I don't think this is a useful question. The other useless question is, what tools do we now have to monitor COVID-19? I'm saying that a bit controversially. I don't really think they're useless, but they are useless when we're talking about risk reduction and saving ourselves from future versions. The first one is useless because there are things about the incidence and spread of COVID-19 that we couldn't have mapped or measured. We can make maps of the flows of illicit trade in animals or models or vectors of transmission, but we can't model the patchwork of government regulations or the efforts to control or manage or ignore the cases. You couldn't model, for example, the fact that Geneva, the city where I'm sitting right now, a city that used to have a reputation for medical care that caused the global elite to fly to Geneva to be cared for, is one of the world's hotspots of COVID-19. This is a city that by no measure could be called vulnerable, but through a series of coincidences and decisions that people and systems have made, Geneva is one of the world's hotspots of COVID-19. We knew that there was a serious risk of COVID-19 or diseases like this too. In 2019, in UNDRR's Global Assessment Report, this is our flagship risk assessment report. You see the logo on your screen right now. There was actually this quote: "The pattern is clear. Old diseases such as plague and cholera continue to reappear, and the new ones invariably emerge to join them. This is driven by a complex and challenging interplay of factors reflecting the interaction between biological hazards, people's exposure to hazards, their susceptibility to becoming infected, and the capacity of individuals, communities, countries, and international actors to reduce risk and manage the consequences of outbreaks. Almost all the newly emerging or re-emerging infections have come from the transmission from animals. Potentially hazardous changes in land use, agricultural practices, animal husbandry, and food production have led to increased contact between people and animals with little regard for the ecological and human consequences of connected systems." We published this in early 2019, before anybody had heard the word COVID-19 or coronavirus. This is basically to say, look, there are hazards that we know about. We know about epidemics, but all of these systems that facilitated its explosion into a global pandemic are things that would have been very hard to monitor or map by any means. And I think the second question about how we can monitor COVID-19 is also useless, because the next global systemic risk is going to connect a series of other drivers and other systems that are completely different. And, if we push down the bump in the rug on this side, it's going to pop up in another place. This is not a practical way of solving problems. We need to really zoom out and think about our resources in systems, as well as thinking about the risks as systemic. Can I have the next slide, please? And click, please. Thank you. So these are some events that have been happening. No, they've all happened at once. Sorry. These are some events that have been happening that you may be familiar with. We have, for example, on the slide, the trade winds are changing. We have major forest fires and droughts and climate effects. We have coronavirus, of course. We have methane emerging from the thawing Arctic. All kinds of these hazards are happening, and they're not captured in most risk models that we have. What you see in those news stories are only just hazards too. They're not risks. Risk is driven not only by hazards, but also by human behavior, though. If we think about disaster, the impact of climate change, for example, as a function of only hazards, it removes all human agency. It removes all responsibility for both the creation of the problem and the responsibility to do something about it. So yes, we need to continue to monitor and understand the effect of hazards, but we also need to be thinking about what human activity is doing to make disasters more frequent and more intense and less predictable. And I think that, I'll come to that near the end of this presentation, but a lot of what I think are the opportunities for space-based information are going to be really in getting a better handle, not on mapping hazards, but on mapping human activity, mapping exposure and changes in vulnerability. We think about how those phenomena, the one on the screen, for example, the methane deposits, are changing trade winds or changing ocean currents or massive continental fires. We can think about how they affect the systems that we rely upon. Not just, an earthquake knocks down a building. That's a very simplistic view of a hazard and an impact. But if you think about droughts or wildfires or even COVID-19 and its effects on our food systems or on our transportation systems or on our healthcare systems, not in specific impacts on hospitals or individuals, but education systems as a whole, or trade or energy, all of these systems are interlocking, and all of them both facilitate and offer opportunities for us to reduce risk. So I guess it's important for us not only to map how the impact of disasters affects those systems, but how the creation and structure of those systems propel or exacerbate risk. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So we can talk about some of the models that we've seen. We can talk about some scenarios, but I think what's important is to think about those as being part of an information ecosystem or several information ecosystems. Just as risk resides in systems, we're coming to understand that the best tools we have to understand risk are not tied to specific sectors or orthodoxies. That we need to start thinking about the tools that we have, the models or scenarios from space information. Probably many of the people on this call have done PhDs in sort of getting so specific on a particular model. And that's super important that we are deep on this, but we also need to be broad. So deep is good and broad is good, like the ocean. I think it's important to not just talk also about data. Data is important, data is clean, data is valid, but so much useful risk information is not clean and is not even necessarily interoperable in ways that we're accustomed to using it. It's not necessarily easy to use or open, but I think a lot of the opportunities that we'll have to make better use of what is a very deep set of space-based technology is going to be in figuring out how to apply it more broadly into those other sources of risk information, other applications of risk information that are not used to dealing with that profundity and sort of rigor that the space community is accustomed to, and it's going to sort of be a requirement to turn it sideways. Information does exist that connects the metrics we're used to dealing with the real way it looks for real people, and it connects to better solutions. If you showed, for example, in the top left of that screen, you see the ensemble mean and spread for some weather models from ECMWF. If you showed that to a city planner in Laos or New Zealand or Mexico, they might be able to figure out what it means, but they might struggle to know what to do with it. They have resources that they're already using to make decisions. They have information. So we need to be thinking about remixing some of the tools that we have or some of the ways that we communicate it and blend it and connect it to the questions that people are really asking. Sort of getting away from a supply side, this is what we have, I hope you can use it, to what's your question and how can what I have help you to answer your question, or how can I connect it to something that can. So space information is part of a really big ecosystem, and it's up to you, not up to the eventual users, to make it useful and relevant. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So I guess I'll try to conclude fairly practically. I think these are what I think are the opportunities for space information, some of the lessons that we learned from COVID-19, but that we have been learning over the course of a few years, as we've come to understand that risk isn't just an event, is a disaster and is an event, and there's an impact, and that's the end of it. That there are systems and there are knock-on effects and there are changes to everything that happen after every event. So if risk is driven as much by human activity as by forces outside our control, it seems obvious that the most important opportunity to connect space-based information to understanding and managing risk of the type that we can expect to see increasingly frequently, like COVID-19, is really to invest more in understanding the effect of that human activity on risk. Again, thinking about exposure, and when I say exposure, I'm talking about the built environment. That's the easy part. We have loads and loads of space-based analysis of the built environment, of infrastructure, of bridges and roads and buildings. Not that. I'm talking about changes in trade patterns. I'm talking about changes in human settlement. These are things that I think our growth areas and our opportunity areas for better understanding the world. I think it's not outside of the realm of what's reasonable or possible either. Space-based resources can tell us about changing human migration patterns, for example, or the effect of green belts and urban parks on forests on air quality, or on topsoil loss and fertilizer leaching in relation to algal blooms or farming productivity or the utility of windbreaks. But it's really about connecting what's observable from space-based information to other kinds of information to make it useful. Soil quality near industrial tailings ponds and its relation to economic quintiles of the households that live near them, or the quality of water 100 kilometers down the river, or ocean traffic trends in their relationship to species migration, or diesel spills, or global commercial trade activity. This requires creativity, it requires collaboration, it requires flexibility. But I think it's important to, I'm going to go through these 6 points in order here. Space-based information is, but can be more than the sum of its parts. It really is more than just observation data. It has the possibility to really guide us towards making good decisions by, as I said, remixing with other things. The second bit of advice is to show people what they need to know, not necessarily what you've spent your careers creating for them, but start first with what their problem is. The third is sort of a two-part. It's to help your allies, the people you're intending to support, to understand what you produce. A mean and spread from ECMWF is fine as long as somebody understands it. And then the other part of that is to add new allies. The fourth is to help those people and those systems, those organizations that have the means to influence research and policies and programs to align their work to evidence. Titus was talking about connecting to sources of finance, and that's absolutely essential. This is an evidence source. So let's use evidence to help those decision makers who have the means to influence policymaking or research to align their work really towards where it's going to make the most difference. Disaster management is too late for risk reduction. Disaster management is fine and it's very important, but there's so much more that space-based information can do to help us understand what could be done and what should be done before we have to manage something to really reduce risk before it becomes a disaster. And the options and the opportunities to reduce risk are really everywhere. So as you're thinking about new allies, also think beyond just hazards and tracking hazards or tracking indicators of hazards and really thinking about other opportunities. In the example at the bottom, you see mapping flood damage is fine, is important, but really what's probably more valuable would be highlighting the floodplains that are bad construction zones. That's risk reduction. That's an opportunity to leverage the power of space-based information to do something that is proactive and constructive before the major event happens, before the disaster happens, rather than being really satisfied with how great our satellites are at showing all of the poor people whose houses have been damaged or have been displaced. That's my last slide. Please go to the next one. It's got my contact information if anybody has any further questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam. That was a great presentation, and specifically the last slide that really gave good insight of how space-based information should be well utilized. Surprisingly, your presentation has gone so in harmony with what Titus was trying to say about the nexus, connecting different, players, parts, and policies, and everything together, and also what Sanjay inaugurated this session with his policy perspective research. So I think that sets a great context. The first presentation through different and the last presentations conveying more or less similar messages and great messages for space-based communities. And this particular session is probably, I would say, it was not talking too much about technology, but the kind of, how space should really get integrated with various other information and communities, and so I think it makes a lot of sense. And just to give you some information, last few years, since 2015 after Sendai, UN Spider community is mainly focusing on policy perspective, going from countries to countries and telling them to include space-based information in disaster management strategies, which are basically by 2020, every country should have the disaster management strategy in a place as per Sendai framework mandate. And we have been doing that effort a lot. So I think we are trying to be in tune with the ongoing efforts of how disaster resilience should be built. So thank you, Adam, so much. Can we give a few minutes to Titus, if he can still speak, to conclude in 2-3 minutes, and then we have some question and some discussion. So Titus, are you still there? Yes. Can you speak, Titus? Titus, you on the camera. Titus, can you speak now?
Hello?
Yeah, Titus, can you speak now?
Sure.
We can give you can you conclude a presentation in 2-3 minutes so that we can at least have discussion on one question in 10 minutes that we are left with.
All right. Yeah. Thanks so much. If you can hear me, then I will just proceed.
Yeah. We can hear you, but you need to conclude it early so that we can have some discussions.
Okay, yes. Excellent. I'm sorry, the technology has just, but then I'm glad that I'm back again. Just trying to conclude. I think my last statement, I've just the presentation that came from Adam, and it appears like we were talking to each other when we were presenting all these things in relation to the fact that he's also thinking about space. I mean, systematic or system thinking, which is very key in terms of the humanitarian development and peace nexus. And that's the way we need to go forward. All of us advocating on the same agenda. But at the point that I got stopped was when I was trying to mention this point that came from Albert Einstein, which says that it has become appallingly obvious that technology has exceeded our humanity. And I think that's very important. If we look at the way we do things now, we have so much technology, but then, humanity itself has not given us the opportunity to be able to use these technologies that are available. And we still continue to face disasters every day now and then because we are not prepared to learn the lesson and take these things forward. Now, the other statement that came from one of the most renowned former UN Secretary General is this quote that I'm going to read to you, that human family will not enjoy development without security, and will not enjoy security without development, and will not enjoy either without respect for human rights. So you recognize that all these three components are coming together, that we cannot enjoy development in the wake of all these conflicts that are going on in the world, or even in the way of insecurity, where climate-triggered event has pushed most of our people and all of us into very dangerous situations. So neither can we have security when there's development or development when there's security. But the two of them are very important to be able to reduce or to eliminate the word humanitarian response. Now, I think the underlying factor here is that UN SPIDER has a greater space across the entire envelope of the humanitarian development and peace nexus, especially on the access to real-time data, which has just been mentioned by Adams, and also in relation to coordination and the policy aspect, as well as the early warning and early action that needs to be in place. I mean, especially in terms of the early warning, most of our, either we call it anticipatory or crisis modifier or contingency plans, all these things can only be effective when we have early warning in place to be able to reduce and intervene and respond to the need of the people. Now, in conclusion, the nexus actually requires a holistic approach and system thinking. And this is what we've all been talking about. It requires time. It takes time for people to leave their comfort zone. It takes time for people to communicate complex issues and then to build partnership, unusual partnerships. Sometimes we have to do that. Space and advocacy for changing the mindset for resilience is very important. It also requires that we make use of the current response, that is the COVID-19 in the face of other disasters. For instance, in Asia, we know the hurricanes and typhoons, and across Asia, we know the flood. I mean, across Africa, we know the flooding, the desert locusts are all ringing our various areas. So responsibility, it is the responsibility of everyone, including UN Spider. But let me give you this statement that, as one wise man once expressed, when everything is everyone's business, it then becomes nobody's business. And that is what we need to be very mindful of. So it is critical that everyone is on board, not saying that it is UN Spider business or it is a UN business, but then all of us have to be on board to make sure that we can contribute in our various ways, in our technical ways, the skills that we have, the resources that we have to be able to make a change. So the nexus also requires changing in programs. The usual way of program cycles need to be changed. The way we respond to emergencies need to be changed. We need to bring in the development and peace actors in place, especially in areas where conflict is protracting. For instance, in Syria, Democratic Republic of Congo, and then in the Sahel. It helps better delivery of services across all the pillars that we are looking at, the 3 pillars, that is the humanitarian development and peace. And it also helps to strengthen capacity of the affected region and build partnership and reduce duplication. So the nexus goal should be pursued among humanitarian development and peace actors and donors with common agenda. And this is where we talk about the policy earlier on, that once we are all together with a common agenda, it means that it gives us the opportunity to come up with a policy statement that can address all the needs. So ensuring that resources are made available to tackle a common cause, which is very important, and responding to life-saving needs while reducing vulnerability and need of all those left behind, instead of a quick fix in terms of meeting the needs during disasters. We should think of working towards reducing the need. After all, the disaster we keep on talking is just as a result of the failure of our development programs. And we normally say that an act of God, as used to be some time ago, will become an act of criminal negligence tomorrow. And then the price is what we always pay for in terms of responding to the need of the people. So COVID-19 provides an opportunity to, our responses are linked to agendas, and in some cases, peace. And these are fundamental. And this is a subject area that we all need to champion, that as we go back to our various countries, or as we sit back in our various countries participating in meetings, we should ask ourselves, do we have all the stakeholders that are needed to be here to make sure that at least the response goes into the development phase, and where peace is paramount, that we bring in the peace builders in place. So I think I'll stop here and just say thank you for your time and apologies. The last slide provides some references, which you can probably be looking at somewhere along the line. If you have time, at least you can look at some of the references that I've made, and they're a very useful document for you to read to be able to understand what is it that we refer to as the humanitarian development and peace nexus. But once again, thank you to Sharish for the opportunity on this, and I look forward to any questions for clarification. If the internet goes off again, I'm available to answer questions via email. Over to you, Sharish.
Thank you, Titus. Yes, we glad that you could make back. We still have 10 minutes, and there's one question. The question appears very common difficulty from the developing countries, but probably it can be addressed from different perspective by each of the panelists. So it is basically from our colleague from Ghana. He's from National Disaster Management Organization, NDMO. He says, how do you manage emergencies in the midst of COVID-19 when PPE kits are virtually unavailable for responders? Now, this question can be addressed through different things, how one can be better prepared and all sort of things, like policy perspective and all that. But probably we can take just around 2 minutes of each to address based on this question, and anything else that reflection our panelists wanted to convey in the context of this particular question. So maybe we can go in the sequence. If Sanjay, do you have anything to say on this?
Sis, I think I'm not the right person to respond to this question. I'll wait for some question. Right.
Yeah. Right. What I would say, and Krishna Vatsa, he explained a lot of experiences on how much more advanced planning was done in the context of upcoming disasters in India, and I think what it needs is better information and better preparedness. So, any intervention from Krishna's side on this? Mr. Krishna, are you there still?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, very well.
Yeah, okay. So, yes, PPEs are very, very important part of the response. And if the countries have to deal with the COVID-19, they must have sufficient stock of PPEs. And I would say that, we didn't have any manufacturing unit for PPEs. In fact, when the COVID-19 started, the availability of PPEs was the most important question mark for us. We didn't have PPEs at all, and it was quite a struggle. But I think in the intervening period, we started manufacturing PPEs. In fact, this crisis came as an opportunity to become a manufacturing center for the PPEs. Today, India is in a situation that in addition to supplying PPEs to all our health workers and a whole lot of responders, we are also exporting PPEs. So in a very, very quick time, we ramped up the production of PPEs, and today we are very significant exporters of PPEs. So the question, this question, which is very important, should be answered in a way that countries need to work to enhance their capacities, national capacities. And we should take these opportunities to address the challenges. The way India did in a very, very short period of time, we started manufacturing PPEs. And today the PP is not at all a problem. So I think all the countries need to take a leaf out of that. Thank you.
Krishnaji, this one more just connected question. Since you have faced all this cyclone Amphan and Nisarg and other things during the peak COVID-19 spread, and now tomorrow another cyclone is hitting Tamil Nadu, and we have ISRO's Indian Space Research Organization's disaster management system. So what is the difference of what you faced in April and facing now? Because you have highlighted that better information preparedness can contribute. So any context in that that can also be helpful for people.
Yeah. There are two significant differences. One, that when Cyclone Amphan and Cyclone Nisarga hit us, we had not reached the peak. The incidence was increasing, and both the cyclones actually brought some increase in the incidence. Now we are at a stage where the incidence is going down. We have reached the peak, and actually now from the peak in September, we are almost a half, So at a time when our incidence is going down, this is not going to make a huge difference. So that's one thing. Second, we have far more capacity to deal with it. We can augment our testing facilities wherever we feel like. We can set up the RAT and RT-PCR testing facilities anywhere. So that gives us, and we have PPEs available for the responders. So all that gives us a lot more confidence in dealing with the crisis. And third, that we stick to our financing arrangements, whereby we would always earmark some money for natural hazards. So after dealing with so many cyclones and floods, we are more confident in dealing with one more cyclone, and no issue. We will deal with it as it comes. Of course, we can never be complacent, and we need to monitor it very closely and take all the possible precautions. But experience is always a great guide. Thank you.
Thank you. And this experience is probably really useful for other listeners, the participants. Thank you, Krishnaji. Any other panelists who would like to contribute onto this question or any other reflection? Maybe we can just ask if Titus and Adam wants to say something. So Titus, anything else you would like to say before I go to Adam then?
I'm just trying to get back and I have problem. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. We can hear you.
Sharish, can you hear me?
Very well.
Oh, excellent. That's a great question. But I think what the COVID has just taught us is that we need to have the capacity, national capacity. We need a technology. And the COVID has just tested our innovative ways of doing things. Of course, I mean, PPEs are limited in many ways, but PPEs are not the only solution to all these things. So it also tells us what are the policies in place that can make us change the way we do things so that we can be able to make sure that at least things are available. If they are not PPEs, what are some of the other protective measures that we can take in each and every one of the countries that we belong to? So I think innovation is very important. The policy direction, planning, and flexibility in the way we do things is very important in making sure that people are protected. Obviously, just looking at what Krishna has said in terms of evacuating people, that's obvious, but certain measures needed to be in place, even if the PPEs are not available to everybody, and even the PPE themselves bring all kind of health hazard. People are reacting to them, you know, and then environmental hazards are also being posed by these PPEs. So I think the question is that how best can we, in our innovative way of doing things, how best can we turn around and make sure that we can have other sources that are in place to be able to respond and while keeping, you know, life safe. So I think my response to that would be to make sure that at least the issue of making sure that national capacity technology, I mean, is available and people are flexible in terms of, you know, changing their policy direction and giving the giving people the opportunity to take the risk is very important. And that's all that COVID-19 has taught us. We cannot be depending on people to come and help us, but then we need to make sure that solutions are locally made and then we respond locally to the COVID. And that's what I would say here. Over to you, Sharish.
Thank you, Titus. That's a great insight as well. And you are in the region. This message goes well there. Adam, we are still left with a couple of minutes. Would you like to contribute something on second thought?
It's an interesting one. I read the comment and the question about the PPE, and this is something that normally I would be the first one to put my hand down. This is not my area of specialty anymore. I try to get away from emergency response, but it is an interesting one. Again, if we start to think about the systems perspective of supply chains. I had a conversation with an NDMA, on Monday this week. And it was very interesting because they were highlighting to me that their national emergency response plan did not have a consideration of their supply chain. It was one of those things that they assumed that they would have PPE supplies or access to medical supplies or a reliable cold chain. And because COVID-19 has basically thrown every part of their emergency management system into action, they suddenly realized that their customs clearance procedures and their sort of guaranteed flow of both PPE supplies, but all kinds of other supplies that are essential to life, to development, were not considered part of their emergency management plan. And this has caused them to start to think, again, in a much bigger way about emergency management from their perspective before was, do we have the trucks? Do we have the fuel? Do we have the pre-positioning? And now it's really, do we have clear focal point in Ministry of Health and a clear focal point in customs and really systems that they'd not thought of being connected to before. So I don't have a piece of specific advice for the gentleman from Ghana, but I think that that's really an instructive moment for hopefully a lot of our other systems to adapt themselves to hopefully what is a one-time event, but probably we will have other events like this, and we need to be thinking really in much more integrated ways to be prepared for the future. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. So now it's right 11 o'clock and 1 minute. So thank you all the panelists who have done really great job of bringing such a great insight from their perspective, their organization, their experience. I think a lot of crux of their experience was discussed. I would say this panel provided right from policy perspective to the national experiences from Japan, India, the mechanisms like Sentinel-Asia, how they are integrating different technologies to bring the information in advanced manner for addressing the crisis within crisis. And we also saw the policy nexus and how the information should be well connected. So this particular session probably was really, I think, it has given a lot of learning, not only to space community, but different participants who might be, a lot of them might be disaster managers, how to integrate technology into their contingency planning or how to use it well before building resilience, not just addressing the emergency response. So I think it was a great flow of information that we saw in this particular session. I thank every panelist for giving their great insight. And this conference will continue into 3 more sessions. So next session will focus more on to space technology applications in addressing COVID-19 or other kind of pandemic situations. And then tomorrow we have session on climate resilience related applications. That has also been mentioned by everyone in this panel, that climate change is one of the important things we need to address. And tomorrow we have session 4, that is the UN Spider Network. The countries will narrate their experience of incorporating space-based technologies right from policy perspective to making an application for emergencies. So a lot of countries are going to speak how past few years they have been engaging with Spider and this particular building the applications. And I think we'll learn a lot from each other. We also have a network of regional support offices, and some of them will also be sharing their experiences tomorrow. So session 4 will be very rapid fire session, kind of a lot of exchange of information will happen and a lot of learning will go. So this is how this conference will get into 4 different sessions. So I saw a good number of participants for this session today. We had more than 103 participants. Although there were not many questions, but I'm sure that messages from each of the panelists were very, very clear. So thank you again, everyone. Thank you all participants. And again, after 4 hours, so 3 o'clock in Europe time, that would be a bit late night in Bangkok, or the Asia will be a bit late, but it will be early morning in Americas, and we have a great panel that will be talking about space technology contribution during pandemic situation. So I hope most of you will come back and participate in this session, and also you will post your questions for the discussions. Again, thank you everyone, and see you after some gap again. So thank you everyone. Thank you, Mr. Gail, for hosting this from UNDRR, and thank you, M. Agao, for keeping good eye on your slides. Thank you so much, everyone, and see you again after some time.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Emma.
Thank you. Bye-bye.